I'm Gene, and this is Perfect Flow. I'm a New Zealand-based athlete and coach focused on optimizing performance, health, and well-being. While I have a professional background in biomedical engineering, I've chosen to follow my more immediate passions for running, endurance, adventure, movement, nutrition, lifestyle, community, psychology, and personal growth. My goal in starting this podcast is to connect with bright minds to extract the information I need to live a life that makes sense and feels good, and share those conversations with others. Apart from your favorite podcast app, the best places to follow my work are perfectflow.nz, genebeveridge.nz, and Perfect Flow on Facebook. Hey, Gene here. Welcome back to Perfect Flow. This is episode 33 of Perfect Flow, and it is with team number 33 from GODZone. I had the chance to sit down with the Secret Billionaires. That's Alistair McDowell, Emily Wilson, Reese John, Tom Hadley, and one of their support crew, Tim Burrell, and talk about their journey to 5th place in GODZone. They took just under 7 days to complete the course, and it was a massive mission this year. So I was really looking forward to hearing how they tackled the navigation, of course. There were a lot of big decisions to be made on those trekking legs. And you'll hear the whole journey of their course out en route, plus a little bit about their preparation. And I think this episode is just jam-packed with tips for anyone who's looking to do GODZone or any such races in the future. These guys are getting right up there amongst the best, but they've still got things that they're looking to work on next time. They had some good ideas around the types of training that worked really well and some of the preparation they wish they had have done more of. There was also a lot of good advice about keeping feet operational, and that was really crucial with some of these long treks. And as those who are following GODZone know, some teams were forced to pull off the course due to feet issues. And I was really happy to hear about Reese's navigation. It was really outstanding, taking that level of navigational proficiency through 7 days with very little sleep. It was really impressive, and he's got some good tips, especially with night nav. And I also found some of the psychology really interesting, especially about stopping when you want to keep going, and it's really prudent to stop or slow down and deal with some issues, but there's some really tricky human biases to overcome there, and they've got some really great advice for anyone who's doing some of these long expedition races in the future. So please enjoy this conversation with the Secret Billionaires. And I should also add that if you're keen to see the maps, then they're available in a blog post on my website, genebeveridge.nz. And also there is a video to go along with this recording. If you're just listening to the podcast, then consider watching on YouTube. Or also on genebeveridge.nz, there's a video there. So I'm here with the Secret Billionaires. Thanks, guys. We've got the whole team that's managed to come on, including support crew. So most people will be listening to this just on audio. So it's helpful if the listeners can get the sound of your voice. So how about we just start going around all 5 of you and just say hi and what your name is.
Sweet, kia ora. My name's Tom. Yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Reese John. Good to meet you all.
Hi, I'm Alistair, and thanks, Jane, for having us on your podcast.
Cool. Emily?
And I'm Emily. Hey, guys. Great to hear you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tim. I'm the support crew for these legends.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to get into your story for GODZone this year. I thought we'd start just by listing off what your kind of combined experience is so far. How many GODZones do you have between you all?
So I think I can answer that. It's Reese speaking. I think Emily is possibly the most experienced of all of us. She was saying during this race, this is her 8th GODZone. I think she's had 2 forced sidelines with injuries and surgeries in the last couple of years, but she's definitely the stalwart with the most experience and has a lot to bring to the table from that respect. I think I'm next on 7. This was my 7th, having not done the first one, and then Rotorua and Canterbury were the other ones I've missed. So that was good to come back. And then Alistair, I can't remember how many you've done. 3 or is it 4?
I did Kaikoura and Wanaka, so this was my third.
And then we've got young Tom Hadley, who's it was his first go, although you wouldn't know it.
Fresh. Nice one, Tom. Cool. And how was your preparation going into this? Was everyone fit, healthy, no injuries?
I can talk about that. So our team came together about last July, but one of the challenges was that we were all scattered across the country. Reese and I were in Christchurch, Emily's in Wanaka, and Tom was a bit of a late ring-in. So we didn't really get too many team missions in per se. Reese, Emily and I did one packraft trek mission in Mount Cook area about 2 months beforehand. But other than that, we're all doing active things throughout the year. And as they say, you don't train for GODZone in a few months or even 1 year. It's the last 10 years, which will add up to help you on the day or the week. But I think none of us had any injuries, which was good going into it. You've got to be totally fresh.
Yeah. And what kind of preparation what were the rest of you doing?
Yeah, so I definitely felt a bit undercooked this year. My wife Jen and I have just had a baby. Well, he's actually he turned 1 the day before GODZone, so that was in the midst of all the packing. We had a birthday cake, but it's meant that combined with a busy work schedule has given me not much time to do what I'd normally consider to be adequate GODZone training. So I think a lot of Saturdays consisted of walking up the Port Hills here in Christchurch with Angus on the back, and then we'd get to the top of the Sugarloaf, the highest point near where we live, and then drop down to the cafe at the top there, and Jen would order a coffee, and I'd do a couple more laps up the Sugarloaf, and managed to accrue about maybe 800 meters climb total, but it never felt quite as much as I'd want to, and then. A lot of the biking had to be just back and forth to work and a couple of local bike rides. But yeah, as Al says, I think in any of these longer races, it seems, well, I've certainly learned with this race, it seems more to be what your experience is rather than how cardiovascularly fit you are going into it. Certainly, I didn't consider myself to have a top end going into the race, but you never use your top end anyway, so it doesn't seem to matter.
So how heavy is young Angus compared to a pack raft?
Well, he's 2.5 pack rafts now.
Good.
So he's 10.5 kilos. So almost 2.5 pack rafts, depending on whether they're wet or dry. So, yeah. So he was a good substitute for a nice heavy pack with a few other bits and pieces. A bag of rice in the bottom of the carrier with him was quite a good simulation weight.
And Emily, how are you going into this year's GODZone compared to your level of preparation in previous ones?
Yeah, I felt pretty fit. Like I'd actually been training for Coast, which I know is a bit faster and lighter. So I don't consider that great build up to GODZone, but I work a bit in the bush, and I'm just, I suppose, like Reese touched on, from years and years of doing stuff in the backcountry, I always feel pretty strong and confident the longer it goes, I feel like it's more about team dynamics than it is necessarily about being super fit. I suppose strength endurance just comes with age, and that's good. Yeah, I felt personally pretty good. I'd had a long lead in, and just consistency, always out doing things, and consistency across all 3 disciplines is always good too. I often, every week I'm biking, running and paddling. So it all adds up, I think. Yeah.
That must feel great to know that your fitness is so embedded into your physiology that it's not going to disappear because you don't do sharp training for a few months.
Yeah, I feel like, I'm not saying that I would feel completely relaxed. Like I'm not, it pays to be fit. by all means. But I think time on your feet and you being used to a heavy pack is probably more important, and especially for these longer versions like we knew this year was going to be, like Reese alluded to. It's, you don't quite need that top end. It's more just how prepared you are to be a bit uncomfortable and to ride that wave, really. But I think, as you'll hear, I suppose, through the tales, we definitely did a bit of that. But no, yeah, it's good. It's a good feeling. It's more about the teamwork, team element. I think that's really what it comes down to in the end.
And Tom, how did you feel going into your first GODZone? Were you nervous?
Yeah, I was pretty excited going into my first one. I'd done quite a bit of adventure racing more in the time when I was in high school, so I think I knew what to expect with GODZone, so I was very much excited for that. Yeah, most of that summer I spending a lot of time on my feet doing consecutive days with a big pack. I was working for a company called MCU, basically doing stoke trapping in Fiordland. So kind of doing 5 days at a time in the bush for work. And then when I wasn't in the bush for work, I was doing my own trips in the hills. So lots of rock climbing, lots of time on the feet. And I kind of convinced myself that would be appropriate training for GODZone. And I think it did pay off in the end and was worthwhile.
I don't think you're making that up. Yeah, that sounds exactly what GODZone turned into. Cool. So let's get on to the race. I want to hear your first thoughts when you saw the course.
Yeah, I was really excited when I first saw the course. I knew it was going to be this traverse from coast to coast, so I was kind of plotting and scheming on where it might cross the divide. But having a course like that gets into some properly wild parts of New Zealand's backcountry, I think really appealed to me. And then also seeing that it was going to be a big, long one with multiple days and some big trekking stages, I think was quite exciting. So it's going to really play to our team's strengths with going the distance, I think.
Yeah, Alistair, you've been doing some big treks in the last year as well. So did you feel like this would play into your strengths?
Well, a lot of the trips that I do, longer backcountry runs and mountaineering trips, are actually with a much lighter pack than you do in GODZone. GODZone this year, the first 155k trek was with the packraft and 3 days of food, and at sort of a faster intensity. So I actually felt a little bit undercooked in those first stages. I'm always trying to go as light and fast as possible. So probably could have done some more packraft missions, and maybe some stoke trapping with Tom would have been good preparation.
Yeah, stoke trapping with a little Angus.
Yeah, I think in GODZone it definitely is all about long and heavy, and that's the sort of training you need to be doing. But I still enjoyed really long trekking stages.
Emily, was that first stage one of the, well, I think it was technically the second stage, but was that long trek the longest single stage you've done in your 8 GODZones?
Yeah, because I missed actually the Fiordland one, so I spent a bit of time in Fiordland myself. But it did shape up to be, absolutely. Yeah, it was long, but it also had enough variety to keep it, interesting enough, and you had a bit of that river time to puncture up some of the walking. I feel like it probably felt a little bit longer because we didn't quite nail the sleep strategy maybe on that first night, but in general, it was pretty amazing. Like, I think I'll never forget that, or we won't, I'm sure, the sunrise over the red hills. It was pretty amazing. You felt really deep in it, and you're like, yes, we're not lily dipping, and we're in it here, which is quite cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Did you find the navigation choices on that leg intimidating or like really important to get right, or did you feel like there were options and either option is okay? Who was lead nav?
Reese was. I mean, I think he can talk to this, but
yeah, we sat down and once we got the maps and had a look at some of the stages, and I think as always with GODZone, the real nav decisions are made on the treks. Most of the time, the bikes and the paddles don't contain too much in the way of nav choice. So we looked at the long trek, and you could immediately see that there were two options there. One was over the Red Hills, or well, actually, we'd initially looked at going before we'd had a good look at it. We'd looked at going all the way up the Cascade and over the Saddle, which we rapidly learned was going to lead us into to real steep country and a lot of gorgy sections. So we discarded that idea, and so that left us with the idea of going over the Red Hills or around the coast. Now, I think subsequently I've learned that there was an option to go slightly further west and avoid going over the Red Hills, which maybe further faster might have done. But looking at those two route choices, it was we were allowed the access to other information sources. And one of those, of course, is Moyer's Guide, which has extremely good route descriptions. But these are all at tramping paces, so you have to kind of adjust what you're. So further north from there, that first section up the Cascade, you kind of need to adjust those, and you also need to consider the fact that the tramping routes are not always the fastest routes as well. But it looked like the Red Hills was going to be about 1,500 meters more vert, but maybe a bit quicker, maybe 10, 15 Ks less in terms of linear distance. And then around the coast was going to be much less vert, but unknown amounts of rock hopping, which could be quite hard on the feet, and potentially difficult to get across some of those rivers. But in terms of time-wise, it seemed about the same.
It did seem quite well balanced, actually, following the GPS, but very, very decisive, like a very bold call to go for those who went out to the ocean, and even for like that, they're all each route has a major challenge.
I mean, you're certainly. I think you have to look at your own strengths when you're deciding on your route. I spoke with Highland Events, who was Team 23 there out the front of the coastal route. And they were very aware that they were quite quick on their feet, and they were quite keen to avoid the vert. And I think it paid off for them because they came through that apparently quite fresh. And we were, I mean, personally, I felt quite tired coming off that Red Hill section, because you get up to the ridge, which you think is going to be easy travel, and then there's 100 meters up and down every time you go up to a little peak, and there was lots of little peaks to go over. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of uncounted vert in there that it's easy to forget about. And so it was definitely more punishing than we expected going across there, I think. You add to the fact that it's night and then there's mist and you're wet and all those other things. And it leads you to be quite tired after just the first night.
So where did the 24-hour mark put you?
So we were, I guess 24 hours was 11 o'clock or midday. We would have been in the Pike by that time. So the sun came up on the top of the Red Hills, where team number 1 is there. I think they were just in front of us at the time, or we were with them. So this is bang on sunrise, from what I could see. So you can see Avaya is already coming down the hill. And then there's a group of us on the top of the Red Hills watching the sunrise. But by the time we got to 24 hours in, we were about a third of the way down the Pike, not just above that first little lake.
Yeah,
and then
it's pretty amazing. Doing that whole 24 hours just to take you over into the true wilderness, but then you still had another 2 days on essentially doing this trek packraft combo. What was the sleep strategy like on this stage? Maybe I'll pick on Tom.
Yeah, I think the sleep strategy is something that we definitely could have improved on in this stage, and I guess that's just one of those many things where you learn from your experiences. Going into that stage, we knew that there was the dark zone on the Pike, so it's definitely in the back of our minds that we wanted to be moving as quickly and as efficiently as possible through the Red Hill section in order to make it onto the pike in good time to not get stuck in that dark zone. And I think for us in our heads, we thought that to make that dark zone, the best way to keep moving efficiently would be to just push through that first night and not sleep at all. So as just to spend the maximum amount of time moving. So I think we got up to the bush line just along where the Red Hills tops were starting. And we had like a brief half discussion about whether we should get a little bit of sleep there. But I think both that dark zone in our minds and also just the excitement of being out there and moving meant that we just pushed through without taking a sleep there. And
we got a bit excited as well, didn't we? Because we another team caught us at that point, and it probably affected our decision making.
It looks like you were close with Ataraxia at that time.
Yeah,
you're top sport. You're with top sport. Yeah,
that's right. So we kind of pushed on, and then along the tops there, I think we were flagging a bit. We weren't moving as smoothly as we would have liked to be, and yeah, just really struggling to keep the eyes open at times. So in retrospect, which is, nice to have hindsight for sure, it probably would have paid off to have about an hour's sleep there. But at that point, we were committed, so we carried on and basically pushed through that whole next day. And fortunately, we, despite not moving as well as we would have liked, still made good time and made it through that dark zone on the pike, and were getting out of our boats just on sunset, which was, well, just as it was getting dark really, which was really exciting. And then by that time we were pretty keen to have a really good sleep. So we ended up taking, I think we had 3 hours of sleep in the Hollyford, and that was possibly one of the best sleeps we had of the race. We were all straight out and just in nice dry forest, which I think set us in really good stead for the next day.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happened
zero.
there,
sorry, I'll just clarify. So 0 hours on the first night, and then 3 on the second night, and you got to the start of the trail when you had that sleep, so that you could wake up in the middle of the night and get moving, as opposed to what would it have been with the dark zone, a forced 8 hours or 10 hours.
Actually, so we got off the boats that evening, and then there was a checkpoint at one of the huts on the Hollyford. I think it was maybe Sunshine Hut. So we actually pushed on to that hut and got 2 hours of the Hollyford track under our belts before we slept that night. So yeah, we woke up, and then knowing that there was going to be a complicated bit of bush travel and some slightly more technical navigation the next morning, we slept in a way that meant that it would get light within a few hours of starting the next day. And I think that paid off as well.
Yeah, nice. Alistair?
I think what happened there was, by the time that it was, the last possible chance to sleep was just before the bush line, and that was only around 1 a.m. maybe, and you'd only been racing for about 12 hours, so it feels like it's too early to stop and sleep, but you've still been up since 6 in the morning that day, driving over to the start, so you've still been awake for a full day's work. And then once you really need to sleep, maybe 3 or 4 a.m., you're on the tops and it's cold and windy and you can't really stop, so you're committed. So that's the trap that I think we fell into there.
Yeah, interesting. And how was that next day on the Hollyford? You guys were pushing up against with some of the other top teams.
Yeah, so we did a lot of steep bush bashing up through Hidden Falls section. That was quite challenging. Tom and Reese did really well on the nav there. There's about 400 or 500 meters vertical gain through steep bush. I'm not sure Emily thought it was too bad. I think she described it as quite open terrain. She thought it was quite funny. But it just shows, when you're doing bush trapping in Fiordland, relatively open.
Mm-hmm.
We got into the open, more open river valleys below Park Pass earlier the next morning, and we caught up to Highland Events there. And so that was quite cool to see some other teams and travel with them up the valley flats towards Park Pass. And we had a bit of a tussle forward and back with Highland Events through that section, as we took different route options over Park Pass. We got ahead of them and headed all the way down the that was the rock burn towards the Dart River. So that took us right through to the end of that day, reaching the Dart River just after dark.
Incredible. And was this the first time that you got to see Tim in 3 days?
Yeah, well, we then jumped on the pack crafts. You're allowed to go down the Dart River in the night, so had the glow sticks on, paddle down the Dart River, which is very disorienting in the dark. If you've ever done some night paddling, hard to see where you're going. You get out into Wakatipu, and we arrived at TA3, the end of this huge stage, at about 1:30 in the morning, I believe. And yet there we greeted our faithful support crew waiting for us about 1 in the morning.
So Tim, I didn't get to hear about your preparation, but were you properly briefed in the state that these guys would be in?
I think I knew that they'd be digging really deep. Like, I was under no illusion that they'd be going as hard as they could without blowing up. So, well, yeah.
And what was your jobs at the transition?
Well, obviously setting them up, cooking hot food, always the top priority when you're racing. My jet boil got a thrashing.
Yeah.
I only used it a couple of times before this trip, actually, which is a tad embarrassing, but yeah, certainly got my money's worth out of it on this trip. Yeah, and just doing whatever the team told, or the team members told me to do. Yeah, sometimes I probably jumped in a bit too hard and people told me, oh, I've got it. So yeah, I was trying to find that balance of being helpful, yet not intrusive.
Yeah, I imagine that's really important. And as people get tired as well, maybe they're not quite so aware of exactly how much they're struggling. So, being a mum, I think could be really, really helpful strength. How much of a warning do you get when the team's coming?
Well, after that big trek pack raft, we didn't know where they were because their track kept playing up. So we were just waiting for them. So that was pretty terrible. But generally, we have a pretty strong sense of when they're going to show up based on the tracker. But then you're out of reception so often. So yeah, there is a bit of guesswork involved, but yeah, usually you can roughly predict.
Nice. Did you have to fix any of their feet after that first stage?
It was
this
remarkable how good everyone's feet were, and they took really good care of their own feet, actually. So I didn't have to do anything around that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, nice job everyone then, because that was definitely a tough one, and it sounds like a few teams had some difficulties there. Did you talk with any of the other teams that have had feet difficulties in the long trek?
Did I?
Yeah, or anyone.
Well, we know that Sam Manson from the Top Sport team had really hard, had really rough feet after that stage, and also that team Ataraxia. I think one of their team members had pretty rough feet, so they had to have an extended sleep in that transition. So we had overtaken MacPack Ataraxia without knowing it through that transition.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to them after the race, but I know Jeansy seems to be predisposed to having feet problems. He had a lot of problems when in the Fiordland edition of GODZone. Yeah, it was not looking good, quite infected. So yeah, that's a major challenge to overcome. So you can see why your team was just moving up more as other teams move backwards.
We definitely had our foot problems come later on in the race.
Cool.
I'm sure Emily can tell you a little bit about that.
Okay, cool.
It seems to be a bit random as to who gets foot problems and who doesn't, and a lot of it seems to be due to luck of the draw in terms of what genetic cards you get played. I don't know. Some people just seem never to get foot issues, and other people do, and I'm not sure that their foot preparation is really any different. Or the way they look after them,
Yeah, I've almost seen the opposite, where those that know they have foot problems are going over and beyond to just keep their feet going to the extent that it's not the attentiveness, it's not the attention, it's something else. So how were you guys on the bike? Was that nice to get off your feet?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that bike. I knew some of the others on the team had done it before in previous GODZones and some personal trips, but that whole section alongside Lake Wakatipu, that was all new country for me, so I was stoked. It was really fun to do some quite exciting bits of single track kind of riding and kind of long sections of ducking down as you kind of ducked through all the tutu bushes that were scraping over your head. That was quite exciting. And then I remember we had a pretty cold, windy grind back sort of up the hill towards that transition before the next track stage. So that was a bit more of a put your head down and get it done situation.
Oh, yeah. How was the morale at that point?
Yeah, I think morale was pretty good, especially as the weather was definitely deteriorating at that point, and we're all pretty wet, and there was a bit of a cold southerly blowing up. But yeah, we're all pretty chipper, keeping each other company, having some good yarns, and then going up some of those hills, we got the singing going. So yeah, I think we're doing pretty well there.
Mm-hmm. And the distribution of load, was that still the same as it was at the start of the race? Was there anyone who had started to struggle at that point?
As far as I remember, I think, our distribution was pretty similar. I think we were all carrying our stuff and all feeling pretty good with it. So that was cool.
Yeah, nice one. So what was the next stage after the bike? Maybe Emily, do you want to talk to this next stage?
Yeah, so here was like the crux of the race, right? You've got 1/3 of the distance, but like double the, if not more, the elevation. So we knew that it was going to be pretty buddy. But it's great. The Erie Mountains, I mean, those of me and Reese, or I don't know if Reese, having done the first one, it was pretty, that trek in the first GODZone 10 years ago in the similar area was just amazeballs. So we knew it was going to be awesome. Route choice is obviously always key too. And we had an amazing transition there. I feel like we just all ate our body weight in eggs and mushrooms and soup and all things good and hot. So we had a pretty good time in that transition and just like felt pretty ready to go. And we started on a good pace and we saw these guys were singing along and I was laughing lots and had a little bit of weight, but nothing compared to that first stage. So it kind of felt quite good, a little bit freer. We chose, like after that first hut transition, we chose a line up. And for me personally, I've had really good feet in the past, don't have to worry about them really. But in doing some trapping in Fiordland in November, I actually got a fungi infection, and it was like pretty bad actually and I didn't have any potassium permanganate, and I kind of felt like when we were first going up over those ridges, which was really neat country, I started to feel it kind of coming on between my toes, and it was a little bit worrying because I'm like, oh man, we've got a long race to go, and the only remedy for this is dry feet, and how do you keep your feet dry when your shoes are soaked and you've got dry socks? But the thing is probably needing to stop. So it was really good. The boys kind of like, we're like, no, that's fine. We need to sleep anyway. So we actually stopped probably a bit earlier on the ridgeline at about 10 o'clock roughly and had about a 4-hour sleep. And I was able to put some antifungal cream on and dry the feet out a bit, which is really good. And it was pretty pivotal timing, I'd say, because they'd kind of deteriorated quite a lot in that 5-hour section just as we were kind of going up and around starting to get onto the ridgeline tops, lots of rocks and stuff as well. So that was really, I think, in hindsight, it was a really smart decision, and we moved better after that. And I just put some, trying to keep my feet dry, I got some like food bag, the bigger Glad bags, and kind of put that over my socks and then put my shoes in those just to try and like keep them from getting any water from the outside in, like a little bit more, an extra layer of protection, which kind of seemed to work actually. And in general, like that, we started to see like that was when the route choice of other teams kind of, or in general, like the route choices the amount of route choices became more obvious, because we saw a lot of teams, you know, like it made it quite interesting, really, that had taken lots of different variations from where we were. And throughout that and coming down to the morning, we suddenly found ourselves kind of in a big group of teams. We saw Top Sport coming out of TA. We had Ataraxia and Highland events, and it was all something like back on. We'd all kind of come out together. So that was kind of motivating. I don't know what the boys will talk to this, but I felt like
can I ask about the feet a little bit more? I mean,
sure.
I struggle with some kind of athlete's foot as well, and yeah, if my feet are, you know, sweaty or wet for too long, then they start to get itchy. But that's about it. So what's happening with you that's different?
It's like it feels like it's underneath the skin, so you get really like, it probably starts off with feeling like you've got a bit of gravel in your shoe, like, or gravel between your toes almost. But then it kind of gets a lot more. It's way more than an itch. It's really painful, actually. Like, radiates around, and it starts to make these kind of, not welts, but they are like open wounds. Like, it kind of, yeah, and it spreads quite quick. Like, in Fjordland it was kind of underneath my toes and around, but it can kind of start delaminating your whole foot. Like, I mean, the boys started to get it too. A few red kind of splotches, on the like arch or the inside, like, yeah, base inside of your foot as well. And I'd started to get a little bit of that. So I was like, oh, you know, as soon as it starts, you like really need to stop. I really need not stop necessarily, but just keep them as dry as possible, as much as possible, and just keep refreshing the socks. But there's not, I mean, yeah, the best thing is to keep them dry, and then to obviously get probably weight off them. And those two things aren't necessarily all possible. So you're just trying to mitigate it as much as you can with, yeah, changing socks. And that Glad bag idea was pretty good. And then later on, towards the end of that stage, thank goodness for Reese, this was going to be his, he piggybacked me over a lot of the streams, because just to try and keep them as dry for as long as possible. And he was an absolute legend. I probably broke his back, but in the last, I only got my feet really wet on the last two stream crossings before we finished that whole stage. So it was pretty, since we stopped and had that sleep, you know, a night, and about how long was that, 24 hours earlier. So it's really good. It was really, really good. And then from then on, they were actually really manageable for the rest of the race. And you kind of knew they would be, because you're going further east. It's pretty arid and dry on lots of those bikes. So, yeah, it was just crucial, I suppose, at that stage, just preserve them as long as possible. Yeah, I don't know what else.
Does it get worse with the pressure? Like, if it starts infecting the soles of your feet, is that critically different to it being on top and between your toes?
Well, I've never let it get that bad personally. Well, I've never had it get that bad, but I know from friends' experiences and from knowing what it feels like in the other areas I've had it, that it would get, yeah, extremely, extremely hard to walk if it was, you know, infecting if it spread the whole base of your foot. Like, yeah, it's not good news. It really isn't. Like, it would be really, it's basically just taking all the layers of skin off, and you're walking on probably what feels like hot coals and knives and all kinds of awful things. Like, it wouldn't be good. It really wouldn't be. So especially not at that stage of the race either. Like, I suppose get to the later stages, you might be able to just mangle it together, but there was still some bushy stages to go. So self-preservation, yeah, is key. But yeah, thanks a lot to the boys' patience and stuff, that we, or just, yeah, making us stop early, deal with it and move on. It was good. It was good, actually. In the end, I don't know if they have anything else to say to that, but yeah, that trek was relentless at times, but I felt like in general, being pretty good on our feet, we managed to keep ticking along and kind of finish in pretty good spirits all up, didn't we? I don't know if the boys want to say anything else. I mean,
I can say something. I think there's always this tension when you've got something going wrong. Like, I mean, on that ridge, Emily's feet were you know, the thing we were concentrating on most, and particularly for the person who's experiencing the problem, I think it's very hard to feel like you might be letting the team down. And the other thing that's really hard is maybe stopping a bit longer than you'd want to, especially when there are lots of other teams around. But you know, you're thinking, well, we're going to lose an hour on these people who might be just behind us, or they'll catch us, or we'll lose the team that we've been traveling with. But the reality is that if you don't look after your feet then, or whatever the injury is, if you don't have the rest that you need, then you're going to pay it. It's going to pay back 10 times further down the track. I mean, even if we'd had half the rest and then tried to go on for the rest of the day, I think we'd have been much more than 2.5 hours slower over the rest of that trek. So it's difficult at the time to make that calculation, because there's always this pressure of needing to move. But I think that's one of the most important things in one of these longer races, that, you know, taking the time to let your body recover is really important. I've since read Nathan's race report, and he said that they aimed for 4 hours a night, which is probably more than most of the other teams got every night. You know, and that shows the importance that Avaya put on sleep as well, or at least stopping and getting your feet dry.
Yeah, that's such an important nugget there. We have to push against our bias there a lot. So yeah.
And thanks, Reese. Like, I have to say thanks to, like, yeah, in particular that experience, because I get pretty like, competitive still, even knowing this stuff and knowing that it's going to be better. But in the moment, you're like, oh gosh, we just have to keep going. We shouldn't be stopping for this. You know, you're going to need to stop at some point in the night anyway to sleep anyway. But at that point, there was still a bit of tension in me, like, so early, damn it, we're moving so well, I'm awake.
And it feels like we'd been going for so long at that point. Surely the race is almost over, but we'd only been going for 4 days and we still had about 3 days left. So there's still a long way to go after this.
Yeah, it's amazing that knowing the bias isn't actually helpful to push against the bias. Your brain still finds a way to make you take more risk than necessary. Reese, I wanted to ask you about the navigation on this section. This is some of the more interesting navigation that I've seen in a GODZone. Were you having a ball out there?
I think some of the best part of it was that the hardest stuff for us at least happened at night. And it was often at night that the wind came in and the clouds came in a bit as well. So there were those added layers to it as well. I really enjoyed. I mean, we work collaboratively. I mean, I think everybody in the team's got a lot of experience with navigation, and particularly on the treks. Al and then Tom were doing a lot of the co-navigation and certainly did the lead navigation in many places as well when I got a bit tireder. But I think there was a big route choice to make on the first section of that Air Mountains trek coming up from CP11. And you can see that we'd briefly considered going through the valley, but look, you come up where Team 44 is there on the screen at the moment, which is along the ridge travel. The alternative was to kind of straight line it and go straight down through the valley. And we looked at that and thought, well, it's pretty steep, and you never really know what the scrub's going to be like. It seemed to me that was going to be high alpine scrub and fairly heavy going, especially if we're going to be there at night. And we thought we wouldn't labor that, but the ridge, I mean, again, it's aesthetically, it's enjoyable. I mean, I think everybody who tramps in New Zealand enjoys ridge travel, and so it's always the thing that's drawn me more, going on a ridge. And in fact, we had pretty good travel in places and pretty hard travel in others. And when you look back at the tails or the tracking, the reality is that it didn't seem to make much difference anyway. So I don't know whether they Warren and Adam and the others set out to make these courses much of a muchness, depending, not mattering which route you take. But it seems to be that maybe teams are just choosing the routes that suit them best. But we were very close to Highland events coming out of CP11, and we saw them at CP12, and they took a dramatically different line.
Yeah, the route choices were very well balanced, and so it just came down to execution. Yeah, and not choosing a route that's bad for you, like choosing a dry route if you need to keep your feet dry, stuff like that. But I was, as with you, concerned that the scrub could be pretty nasty as you get into the down away from the tops. But I was also unfamiliar with what the tops were like there, whether they're whether they've got a spiny rocky, cliffy ridgeline, or whether it's more broad scree that you're traveling on. Can you share what those ridgelines that you were on that trek were like?
Well, Emily had some experience in going through this area on the first GODZone, so we knew the tops travel was pretty good. Yeah, it was a mixture actually. The first section of the ridge was there were some really big cliffs, and we had to drop down a couple of rock belts and maybe a couple 100 meters before climbing back onto the ridge. Halfway through, it really kind of mellowed out and became quite walkable. About where we ended up camping, which, if anybody's watching the video, is where our 33 is sitting on the video at the moment. And then further on, it was much the same. I mean, there's some fairly big climbs that are hidden in that again. I mean, similar to the Red Hills Trek. You ended up, well, I certainly ended up underestimating how much climb there was, and I think the official GODZone figures were that it was something like 3,500 meters, and I would estimate that maybe there was a bit more than that, even in the route that we took, and that was trying to minimize the climb, because I think the guys who went through the valley possibly did a bit more climb but didn't go as far. And so again, it's that kind of trying to make that calculus about what you're good at and try not to blow your legs up too quickly.
What time of the day were you doing CP12 to CP13?
That was early morning, so we got down to CP12 at about 6. It was about 8 a.m. And that's where we seemed to all be together.
Do you have any tips for coming off those tops in the right place at nighttime? Any navigation tips? How did you execute that so well?
So we went over. So this was actually one area where I had a look at some of the tracking and decided we'd made a route mistake. So just where we are at the moment there, if you zoom in for the people who are watching the video, we went right over point 1799. You can see our track goes right over the top. And Ataraxia behind us actually ended up camping just before that on that shoulder, and then I believe they came around that bowl, and looking at the map again, I think that could have been avoided going up 100 meters. But having gone along the top, at least we knew we were on the top, and so that gave us a hard point to navigate off. And then you're mainly following ridges, and then you're allowed to carry an outwatch as well with you, so you can actually work out what your altitude is, as long as you've recently reset it and the weather's not changing significantly. So it's a bit of a combination of three things. There's knowing where you've been recently, knowing with fairly good certainty what your altitude is, and then I think compass is very much, well, for some people, very much underrated, but I'm extremely reliant on my compass and getting a good compass bearing and making sure we're always checking that we're going the right way, because one of the things you can easily do at night, and I'm sure many people who are road gainers and orienteers listening to this will know, you can very easily convince yourself that you're going down one ridge and that your compass is slightly wrong. And it's never that way around. It's always that you're wrong and your compass is right. And again, it's one of those cognitive errors that you have to remind yourself of, that really your equipment's normally better than you are, especially when you're tired at night and you can't see very far.
Nice one. You've done that really well, and the execution looked reasonable with this other long navigation leg at daytime. This time, that pack of 4, you've all chosen the same way. Was there any choice to go down through the valleys?
I don't think there was.
Right.
There wasn't really any route choice. I mean, your other option, I guess, was to come up onto the tops from CP12, but that just involved thousands of meters more climb, and it was going to be a lot slower, because a couple of Ks past CP12, once you hit the valley, there was actually a track leading halfway over. And then after that, it was going to be fairly good open country and across some reasonably low passes or low peaks comparative to the rest of the ground around it. So I don't think there were any significant nav choices in the second half of that race.
Yeah, it looks like there's pretty strong consensus. Just scrolling through the tracking here, no one's gone over. So yeah, you're correct there. Cool. So yeah, that's incredible. I was really stoked when I first saw the course to see such big backcountry navigation legs, and very impressed by how most of the teams have handled that. And yeah, the fact that you're paying attention to just that one little extra detour shows that you're paying putting a lot of effort into getting that nav perfect. That's really impressive. How are you? Yep.
I guess you can always improve, and the beauty of GODZone is that you can't just improve in minutes. You feel like when you get to the end, you feel like you can improve in days, and you count up half an hour here and a couple of stops there, and suddenly you've got half a day up your sleeve that you may not have otherwise had. So I think that's one of the best things about going over your race again with GODZone. You really do feel like you can always go back and improve so much and maybe do better next time.
Wow. Was there anything interesting on this next cycle, or was that fairly straightforward? How was morale at this stage?
Well, personally, that was the hardest stage of the whole race for me. I had a bit of a wall on that day. That's the bike ride over the Nevis and the old.
So is this day 4 at this stage or 5?
Oh, it's all a blur now, isn't it? Probably day 5. So the weather's improved, and it's a real hot day over the Nevis, into the Nevis Valley, and there's another huge climb onto the Old Woman Range. A bit of an overlap from the Wanaka, but we're heading over to Roxburgh. And that climb there for me was just relentless, going up and up and up. I think sometimes in GODZones you just hit a bit of a low patch, and we've been going continuously for so many days there. It's sort of natural to have a low patch at some point. But yeah, that was really all consuming for me that day, and I really thank the other guys and taking the weight and giving me a few toes up the hill.
So you did redistribute the load?
Oh, a lot so. Yeah, Reese was really strong on that day, and Emily helped with a lot of towing. So all credit to those guys.
Does anyone want to talk to this other short section with the? I'm not exactly sure what map you had. So was there? What kind of map did you get given for the short stage with all the checkpoints?
All I want to say quickly is that Reese is a bloody legend. He nailed that in the dark. I've never seen anyone walk up to one specific rock amongst so many other gullies and ridges and everything else that was going on. And he was like, it's here. And it was every time. I don't know what the others think, but it was super impressive. I am very, very impressed. I mean, I knew he was great at nav, but honestly, there was so much potential in there to go 100 meters, 200 meters, somewhere along a featureless, or very much the same thing in the dark. So it was pretty phenomenal. And you'll see I'm sure on the tracking that we just hit it like a boss every time.
Cool. I might try to get some of the topo maps from you, so we can have a look at exactly what you guys were looking at.
At one point he said, I've super spiked it. You can tell he was pretty happy with himself.
And the rumor's true, Reese.
I think we had a good stage there. I think we had a combination of having had some good sleep, and then we took some really conservative lines. So from CP19 to CP20, instead of kind of, it was right in the depths of night, and it was pretty foggy then as well. And instead of kind of trying to traverse across that hill, we decided to go south and kind of up that leading ridge, along there, and rather up there, and then dropped into CP20. Once we knew we were at the right height. I think on balance, you can see these other lights casting around there, and we just decided it was going to be very hard to come across multiple different gullies, some of which were going to be mapped and some of which weren't. And I think that worked for us. It might not have been the quickest, certainly wasn't the quickest thing to do in the light, but when you're a bit tired and trying to make sure that you're not losing time by making mistakes, I think it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. We have a bit of a phrase in orienteering that you can't win the race on any particular leg, but you can definitely lose it on any given leg. And so just not being a loser it goes a long way to winning. Cool, nice job. How are you feeling in those day 6 and day 7? Did it feel like the home stretch once you're on a bike, so you're moving faster, and then you're on the water, so you can go with the flow a little bit? Who wants to speak to those last stages?
I will just put a note in about the serpentine though. You kind of flicked over that. That was a very interesting section when you're in a pack craft thinking, yay, I'm going to get some time on a cool river, and we're in a cow pat swamp, for lack of a better word, going round and round, kind of what felt like almost in circles. We cope with it fine. We're in the daylight, we're chugging along, but yeah, wow, there was some questioning in there, thinking, why the heck are we here? But
I remember, I was just super stressed for the whole of that river. So it started out being quite enjoyable because we're kind of sitting in our nice boat and the sun was shining on our legs and it was really good. And then I just started seeing all these things that could potentially puncture a pack raft everywhere. There was like barbed wire coming in from one side, and then once that was over, we came across like a metal waratah just like a few inches under the surface of the water that I like spotted at the last possible moment. And then you could just see waratahs everywhere, and I was terrified because I think at that point, if we'd have punctured a raft, it would have just been this completely demoralizing walk all the way to TA with this big broken raft, just getting dropped by teams coming from behind us. So
Well,
I was really glad when that paddle was over.
We saw a team who had a rip through their raft so long that they couldn't possibly repair it, and they were packing up and they had to walk all the way out. So felt quite sorry for them.
Yeah.
And we'd actually had a puncture in the Pike River well earlier in the race, and we'd had pretty good repair on it, but it was slowly leaking. So this whole way down the serpentine, I'm paddling with one hand and holding the tape down with the other, basically.
Wow,
So
I never would have thought that was such a risky stage. Yeah, I did imagine just a lazy Sunday cruise down the river looking at that one.
Well, it does look beautiful from the drone pictures. You see this swirling river, but when you're actually in it, you're just going around in circles. And credit to Reese, he was following the map closely. So when there was huge dog legs in the river, that we would get out and portage them. So you'd walk about 50 meters to avoid half a K of twisting river.
Nice.
But I think once we got to the end of that stage, got to the TA7 there, which is the start of a 100K bike. Nathan Fave said it's 120K actually. We felt like the finish really was within grasp, because we were doing some calculations of this dark zone that was at the end. And we realized that for us, it wasn't a dark zone. We knew we weren't going to be able to paddle all the way through, but we realized that if we hustled, that we could do this 100K bike and the first 30K of the river just in time to start paddling right at the start of the dark zone. And so essentially we could catch up to other teams who'd been stopped there. So, and at the same time, we'd seen further faster fledglings just behind us coming into the TA. And so we really started to get a bit of a hustle on there, and we felt this energy of lots of teams behind us. And over that 100K bike ride, I think we all felt quite good as working together as a team, biking through towards the coast. So that felt like a really exciting part of the race. Really quick finish for those last 3 or 4 stages.
Yeah, they were coming thick and fast, the transitions towards the end. So yeah, that definitely sounds like a fun way to finish what has been a grueling week. Yes,
one of the highlights was the welcome party in Middlemarch as we came off the Rock and Pillar Range, and there was about 20 people, some of which Tom and I knew from Otago, were cheering us on there. We didn't know what had hit us.
Tim, what is it like from your perspective at this late stage in the race?
Oh, honestly, just so many things going through your head. It was just manic, to be honest. It was utterly manic because I know we kind of dropped the ball really, like for that last coast air section. they would ride 3 kilometers down the road, but it wasn't exactly clear in the race book. It was kind of in fine print. So all of a sudden we had to set up bikes as well at that last transition. And then when they came in, it was like all on, like it was a foot race to the line, basically. Like how close it's going to be was anyone's guess. So I think part of me was like, yes, we're going to finish this race. But then it was just like, well, we could actually get a podium here. Like, it's close. It's really close. And yeah, it was just at the end, it was just a blur. And my self-care went out the window big time. Like, and to be honest, I'm paying the price for it now. Like, I didn't have a proper breakfast. I got really dehydrated, and I just stood there thinking, God, how are these guys doing it? How is it humanly possible to be still moving along the beach at a fairly decent clip? You know,
I think it's worth
insane.
backtracking a little bit to the start of the kayak there. Maybe Emily wants to tell us about going from the bike to the kayak, because I thought that was one of the most exciting parts of the race, just a little bit back.
So we'd just finished our bike, and I feel like the team would agree that bike was good. We, compared to the one previous, I felt we were all like pretty much on the same page and were pretty awake, which was good because it's not ideal to go into the last night thinking like you might have to have another all-nighter. We managed to get half an hour's sleep in that transition, which compared to the others around us wasn't a lot. And I think at that stage of the race, it really counts. Like, it's hard to be racing others that may have had a full night on that river or on that TA. But nonetheless, it was pretty exciting to see Top Sport and some of the other teams all kind of taking off at the same time. I felt a bit gutted because after that sleep, I felt a bit ratty. Like, I felt pretty good coming into TA, and then coming out, I just felt pretty crap for the first time in the race, really. Like, pretty sleep deprived, obviously, as you do, but also what Reese was quick to pick up on, going quite low. And so I quickly had to swap with Alistair because I was just getting a bit blurry vision. Like, I wasn't really being able to focus on what was happening in the river and where the boat was relative to where Reese's boat was and Tom's boat was. So I swapped, and good old Reese, what a legend. He ended up kind of like paddling me through that hour and a half section of kind of fuzzy brain. Like, I was trying to eat a lot, but my stomach was really sore. And I think it was a combination of just like, some bad sleep monsters and quite a significant low probably in the end of it. Like, I've been trying to get some sugar on board, but it wasn't happening that fast. So I spent a lot of time not paddling with my head down, and these guys were amazing. And I really want to thank them because I'm pretty hard on myself, and I was feeling pretty shit because all the time I'm thinking we've got to get, 7:30 is when these guys are going to go, and we want to be there, and what a Trojan effort, because we did get there at about 7:26, and me and Reese's watch is either a little bit early or late, I don't know, in the brain fog moment, but he's saying, okay, before we get out and go to the loo then, and we just turned off to do that, and they're like, go, so the others go, and we're like, sheesh, okay, so we pull on off, and we're off the back from the start, but still kind of in the excitement, which was fun. And I must take my hat off to Tom and Alistair because I just cracked up. The energy was there. It was full force, especially with Alistair. I loved it. He was on fire that morning, which was great for morale in particular. And I felt like we paddled pretty well because, I mean, some of those teams we were around, like Top Sport and stuff, like you take your hats off to them. They are a paddling team. So, I mean, we didn't lose too much time, and that part of the gorge is pretty beautiful. So it was kind of motivating to have others around you to be kind of pulled along in it, but also a little bit stressful at the same time because you knew you were going to come into the next stage where basically they are all going to run. And I'm like, oh gosh, do I really feel like running after 7 days of hustle personally? But anyway, we made it there, and they had our bikes, which was pretty cool. I do remember getting on my bike though, and my handlebars are nearly 180, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what's happened here? But yeah, we got onto that trek, and the boys are really good. They took all the weight, and kind of I set off in a march, and I felt like we did hold a pretty steady pace for that last trek. I mean, wasn't too much running. I know, unfortunately for Alistair, I do feel like I let him down in that suggestion. It's like, yes, we're going to run. But I felt like we did hold I don't know, looking on the tracking with those boys have analysed it, but I feel like we did kind of hold it a little bit. I was a little bit upset with myself, but I'd come a bit right by then. I think it's pretty cruel though. I almost feel like that dark zone, to have been, be pretty munted after a week out in the bush and then then it turns into a time trial for the final 4 hours. It's impressive what Ataraxia were able to do in the end. But that moment was probably the low for me, that last river paddle. Glad to be able to turn around slightly, but a little bit sad that I suppose we came, like Reese would say, I feel like placing wise, I think we came where we deserved to come, like the other teams that put up a pretty good, but it was kind of interesting. And I'm sure for viewing purposes, quite neat to have so many teams so close together, regardless at the end of a race like that, to only be separated by minutes rather than hours always makes it quite exciting. But
can I just jump in and say something? I think anyone who knows Emily will know that she's very hard on herself, maybe without good reason in most cases. Emily is very quick to praise other people, which she has done many times during this podcast, but we probably haven't given her enough praise as well. And I would have to say that Emily's one of the strongest individuals that I've ever met, and particularly racing with type 1 diabetes. It was just incredible to watch how you manage that, and despite that, we're able to really be up there at the top of the sport. So I mean, it was really something to behold, and I was really in awe of you at many times during the race, Emily. So I think you shouldn't be quite so hard on yourself about some of the little blips that we all had.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Thank you, Reese.
And we are glad to hear that you managed to get some sugar to where it was needed. It sounds like if you're going to be having some rest time, then in the boat is probably quite a good choice, because at least you can move. Be a bit trickier on the bike.
I'm going to need to go, Gene. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up now. Anyway, so congratulations, guys. I thought you guys did a really strong performance. And I'm just so thrilled to be following some of you over the past few years, and seeing you get closer and closer to the top. So I look forward to seeing you next year. So thank you for sharing your journey, all four of you, and Tim, the crucial support. So,
and don't forget, my father Steve was also supporting for us as well. So he provided a lot of experience, having done a number of 7 GODZones and however many Southern Traverses before that. So thank you very much to Tim and Steve.
Yes, but just adding to that, Steve was really the brains behind the operation. I just rocked up and chipped in as best I could, and he definitely kept me on track, and I learned a lot. And I wouldn't change the week for anything. It was amazing. So thanks to you guys again. Had an amazing time.
Cheers to Steve and Tim.
Cool.
Thanks very much, Gene.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Steve.
If you're enjoying the Perfect Flow podcast and want more value from it in the future, there are some ways you can support it. The first is to rate or leave a positive review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or other platforms where it's available. The second is to share this podcast or specific episodes on social media or with friends. The third is to get involved more directly through the Perfect Flow page on Facebook, where I'm trying to construct a more interactive community. I want Perfect Flow to belong to the listeners, and if you tell me what topics you're most interested in, or even suggest specific guests, I'll do my best to make it happen. This is your opportunity to be part of something that answers your questions and adds value to your life. Another good reason to follow Perfect Flow on Facebook is that I post links to episodes, blog posts, and anything I find useful to this page. It's a great way to follow my training, racing, and learning. Another great way to stay engaged is to subscribe to genebeveridge.nz. This way you will get podcasts and blogs emailed to you, avoiding the clutter of Facebook. I don't know where this project will take us, but the reception so far has been positive. Who knows where we might be in a few years.